I want to take just a second, too, to really, as I've really enjoyed the conference. I've really been enlightened. Every participant and speaker said something that's stimulated another dimension of my thinking. And I really have enjoyed that aspect. You know, as I look in here and think about where we've been and where we've gone over the last couple of, I guess, 5 years or so, with animal identification in general, and developing our understanding of the technology, of the capabilities, of the constraints, and it's been all a building process, an investigation of sorts, and a learning process. And we kind of threw APHIS into the middle of this, and then we all started throwing rocks from various ways at these guys. And they've done a tremendous job helping us build our understanding, helping us build where we're at today. So John Weimers and John Clifford and Neil Hammerschmidt and Dave Morris, those guys deserve a lot of credit, because despite the fact that we kind of made them take the leadership, and they did, and they've done a wonderful job of it, then we all, in various aspects and various avenues, have gone back and been major, rock throws at those folks, not the people in this room nearly so much as the external. But wonderful job, and we're where we at today, I think, in large part because of some of their investments in continuing to champion this. So the state veterinary and health departments as well have been major role players. So I kind of walk in, after all the really hard work's been done, and now just say, what are some of the opportunities that this can bring to our industry as we look at furthering animal traceability and some of the incentives. I'm going to talk more from an industry perspective here for a moment of not so much what are the benefits that someone who might individually adopt more intensive management practices and those kinds of things associated with animal identification and animal tracing. And I'm going to talk more from the industry perspective. It's the thing that somebody may not directly feel that they get that check written to them for the expenditure they put out for example, a source and age verification program. I'm going to talk more about the industry level impacts of not doing anything if we choose not to, or of being proactive and doing something from what our models say from our benefit cost analysis study that we completed for APHIS. Our models, Kevin mentioned this morning his budgets alone for cattle. I think there's like 44 different budgets that just represent the adoption costs in the cattle complex. Kevin's models and Kevin and Chris Crosby's work go into parameterizing for us what the costs are associated with the adoption. That's down at the producer level, what they have to do to adopt certain technologies. We then build that into a model that builds the economic relationships among consumers, processors, and various segments of the producing sector. And in particular, our economic model includes imports and exports of beef, pork, poultry, lamb, in an integrated fashion. So what happens, for example, in Patrick's pork industry, he also is very interested in what happens in the beef and poultry industry as well, because we're all in this together. There's tremendous substitution among those markets. And if we close the market to pork exports, or that wanes, we all, in the beef industry, in the poultry industry, and in the lamb industry, suffer because we have excessive pork on our domestic market. And likewise with any of the other industries. So we're all integrated in this thing. And what happens to one of our segments directly impacts the others, even if it weren't an animal disease that communicates across different species that would close an export market for us, for example. So I want to just sort of start with those highlights and those points. And, Mark Harmon really said it a lot better than I can, and Pam Yonke said it better than I think most people in the room can with our paradigm shift. And I just was thinking about this as really it is a cultural presence where we're at today. My email was down for a couple days last week, and I got to tell you, I was in a pretty pissy mood. And it probably was, in many ways, maybe not a bad thing, but I'm sure you have the same sentiment. When some technology that actually is fairly new, if you think about our realm of where we've been in the last several years, email came in the 80s, I guess the 90s. We developed the internet, and and I've become so completely reliant in my job on those technologies that if they're not working, I frankly might as well go home. Actually, I'd rather just go to the pub, but then go home after that. It'll be a more productive day for me, and I'll be happier at the end of the day for sure if I do that. And the new generation with all the social networking, which if you look back to the web when it first started, its value as an information source and as a facilitator of commerce and everything else was not there yet. It really initiated more as maybe a precursor to our current social networking. So the social networking will develop considerably more and more intense and more in depth and become much more of an important dimension of commerce, I think, in the coming years. And so we're in that cultural shift where traceability just becomes a norm. And I'll give a little evidence that I think it's a global norm of the next generation, of the generation of people who are now young adults. I see it in the college students all the time. They just expect things to be there that you and I, well, those at least in my generation age range, we had to adopt and learn about. They grew up with these things. And so they just expect it's a natural thing. And what do you mean you can't tell me where that came from? I'm twittering somebody in China right now about what they're doing tomorrow. So, paradigm shift. I'm going to add to some of what George said with respect to the value of animal identification. And George did a really nice job, I think, of sort of helping us understand at the trench level why having animal identification can enhance our animal disease surveillance, tracing, mitigation problems. And it's very closely related, actually, ultimately, to our demand for our product. And so if you think about what makes someone, ultimately this is where, as a market economist, I spend most of my time because there's tremendous value here. If you think about what makes someone buy our product as opposed to someone else's, even if ours is a little bit higher priced than the other one, that means my product has stronger demand. If they choose the other product, that means the other product is preferred. And if you think about the two characteristics that make someone choose one product, whether it's U.S. pork over Brazilian pork, or whether it's U.S. beef over Australian pork or beef, or lamb, or whatever else. Or even, one meat cut versus another. It really comes down to two things in general that we as economists kind of look at. It's one's the intrinsic product characteristics. What is it that I want? It's the tenderness, it's the flavor, it's whatever particular eating experience at that time I'm after with that particular product that I expect it to deliver. So the innate characteristics or quality attributes. The other one, and it's absolutely critical, is the consumer's trust in the product. The things that have to do with inspections, certifications, and traceability is a huge part, and becoming, like I said, just an assumed component of what our consumers expect. They don't know that it's traceability that they're after, but they're after attributes that traceability is essential to assure. Attributes to do with safety and trust and ultimately confidence that that product is going to deliver the characteristics that it promises. And that's a food safety attribute that may include lots of other characteristics. So those two dimensions together are going to make someone either buy our product or not. If we don't trump other products with those attributes, we won't be there and we won't have a place to play. And Mark said 200 people will be out of jobs. In this room, and I agree. If we don't have access and we aren't competing because we don't have the product characteristics and we don't have the trust, we lose the consumer. Traceability has a huge dimension from the industry level to do with the trust and the assurance and the rapid detection and solution to those problems. give you a little bit of a global perspective. And perceptions of the consumer are huge in this deal. And this was just one I pulled off. I can pull lots of different kinds of things like this from different publications. But European gatekeepers. Now, gatekeepers is kind of an interesting concept. These guys, Knight, Holdsworth, and Mather, did intensive interviews in Europe of gatekeepers, which means the CEOs and food product directors for food companies in Europe. And they went across 5 different countries. And these guys are from New Zealand, so they're focusing in on attributes that these folks, the gatekeepers, the procurers of the product, are demanding or expecting of the product that they're purchasing from external suppliers, from those that are importing into Europe. And remember that these gatekeepers are basically reflecting the sentiment of the consumers they're serving. So these gatekeepers, as they're so to speak, are really just trying to assimilate what they think is going to make their company money. And that is being responsive to their consumer wants. In the eyes of the Food Channel members interviewed, New Zealand is in the fortunate position of being perceived as less risky, the trust issue, than many other countries as a direct result of the efforts that have been made to institute the best quality control and traceability systems and technology available. All right, point being, perceived trust of the gatekeeper. It's critical for us as an industry, whether it's pork, beef, lamb, poultry, to have the trust of the gatekeeper in order to gain access to and build our market opportunities there. We did some recent work on surveying consumers in Japan, Canada, US, and Mexico on their perceptions of beef in North America. 55% of Japanese consumers in the survey results told us they had reduced beef consumption as a result of food safety concerns. Perceptions are huge drivers of people's consumption habits. We didn't see anything like that at all in the US and Canada. Much more trusting in our food safety and food integrity that we offer. Different cultures have markedly different expectations and needs here. You know, I almost hesitate to open my meetingplace.com email every day. Just the last 3 weeks. Look what's been on the news service here for our products in that multimedia source. Taiwan banning Creekstone's plant. Russia considering ban on 15 U.S. beef exporters. Russia banning an Iowa pork plant. So on and so forth. Colombia involved. China's involved. Pork, beef, poultry. This is just the last 3 weeks. Start accumulating this thing. Are we in a market where we have some challenges? I guess I asked the question, do we have a trust issue in the global market? I don't know. We might say that's just people playing politics. Russia, they do that all the time. I don't know. You can argue that however you want, but I do know I'm seeing continued constraints, whether they're trade barriers that are just trying to keep things from happening, or whether they're indeed ultimately these government trade policy issues are a reflection of the consuming segments. They're a reflection of their voters ultimately. I do believe the gatekeepers, whether they're government gatekeepers or whether they're other participants, are reflecting ultimately the consumers they serve. So, wow, we've got a lot of noise going on in terms of challenges accessing that global market. So what are the industry benefits? Why move into traceability? Well, market access is huge. And it's very closely related to the animal health issue. If we have an animal health outbreak, highly contagious disease, obviously there's a lot of domestic cost associated with mitigating that disease. We've got a lot of studies that show that. Some of our own work is illustrative of that as well. But what also happens in many of the contagious diseases is we also close markets. And the faster we can mitigate the disease problem, not only does it reduce the cost to George and our government and our producers, the real costs associated with managing it domestically, the faster we can contain it, the quicker we open back up, or at least have opportunity to regain trust of the international community. And when we drag along and show that we can't effectively, rapidly mitigate a problem or regionalize or compartmentalize, as Patrick mentioned, when we show we can't do that effectively, we lose trust for a long time. They just look at us and laugh. So we have to have our system in place and operating effectively for both, for domestic animal disease management, mitigation, surveillance, because it ultimately has a huge economic impact on our industries if we happen to have an issue and it prevails for a while, it persists. It's because we don't have in place a system to arrest it quickly. We lose the market access. And the market access is where really much of the economic impact of the industry as a whole starts to take its toll. And I'll give you just a couple numbers on that here in a moment. We in Kansas, we've got a lot of cattle on feed. Kansas, Texas, Panhandle, Nebraska, western Nebraska, eastern Colorado, where we've got a lot of cattle that have come in from a lot of different places. And I'll pick on the beef industry just for a moment because, as Kevin mentioned this morning, it's where a lot of the costs are. It's where a lot of the biggest opportunities are as well for adopting better tracing systems. You go to a typical feedlot setting in western Kansas. I'm not trying to point a finger at anybody, but we've got cattle in a pen that have been sorted when they got to the lot across several different pens. They were commingled multiple times before they got there. You take an animal, and if you have an issue, suppose an animal goes to the plant in Dodge City and we find a residue issue or something. I'm not saying we have or haven't, but suppose we do. We go back to the feedlot. We can do that pretty quickly. Chances are, if we get back to the feedlot, unless it just happened to be a pen of 100 cattle that actually came from a ranch in Montana or something, we can trace quickly. The typical pen, I don't know where that animal came from. It could have came from we start tracing back, and pretty soon we don't trace anywhere because we have nowhere to go. We don't know where that animal came from. We don't know where it's been. We don't know its cohorts. We can't trace forward or backward. We're lost. We don't know anything about it. Well, George mentioned we've got this mass, and I'm picking on Kansas a little bit because it's where we're at. Well, nearly. We're right next door to it. Kansas, we have on average, and it varies week to week, it varies season, we have on average 80,000 head of cattle coming into the state per week, into our massive feeding industry. Oh, they're coming from as far away as Hawaii. I don't have it up here because it's off the map. And from different countries, Canada, Mexico, and states all over the place. On average, 80,000. That's a massive amount of cattle coming from all over the place, commingled, resorted, and the identity lost. How do you ever have a system to manage? I don't know how you do it, George. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you manage tracing back and identifying and honing in. You basically, you can't. You throw up your hands. You put Brian Rickard out there to work some miracles, right? And he can and does, but wow. So challenge. It's difficult. And what happens not only in a case if something occurs, we demonstrate we can't trace as effectively as we'd like to have people believe, we lose trust and we lose that market access. Paul Clayton, I don't know if he's still here. Wow, you guys, what a story you have to tell for the U.S. meat exports, right? You guys have done a phenomenal job. Oh, the weak dollar might have helped in 2008, by the way, too. But let's look. We have, as an industry, as a meat complex, become quite reliant on exports for our market. Pat, what'd you say, $40 in 2008 per head added to our hog value? Yeah, look at that. Exports have just skyrocketed in the last few years. We are dependent on our global economy for vitality in our industries. Without the export market, everyone who participates in this industry, big, small, medium, tiny, you're all adversely affected. Like it or not, you're not insulated from it. You're never going to be. It's a global industry. So the growth's been wonderful, but it's fragile. And let's just look at that beef story. Is it fragile? Yeah. Wow. The BSE event cost our industry about $3 to $4 billion just in 2004 alone from lost exports. That's real dollars. Had we had that export market open, prices would have been much higher than they were. To the tune in 2004 of that magnitude of an impact on the industry. Okay, that's our economic model starting to show us what can happen when we lose those accesses. I'm going to look at a couple other numbers here just to give you some magnitude, and then I'll kind of wrap things up here. Our model says that if we close the beef export market completely, we close the entire thing down for one day, it's a $9 million a day cost to the producers in our industry. That's the producer value impact. And a lot of times I hear, oh, it's the packers that benefit from exports and the packers then that will lose if we close it. No, it's the producers who will lose really bad if we close it. And that's why my comment, the longer we keep markets closed, the worse the damage day by day gets, to the tune of it's $3.3 billion in a year. Very similar to the number I just quoted, what the 2004 loss was to the BSE event. Pork, not quite as bad a loss, but still very substantial. Oh, that's at 2007 export levels. 2008 levels, you saw pork, it's going to be greater because our export levels have increased. So per day, we have a huge impact on our industry from the market access loss associated with if an event happens that closes down those markets. Well, Paul Clayton mentioned it, I'll just highlight again. If you look at where we're at in a global environment, where our competitors are, the yellow, well, at the top, it's sort of a greenish yellow, highlights Australia, Brazil, Canada. In the beef complex especially, and obviously they're also, Brazil especially, a big player in some of the other segments, but in some of the other species. But certainly from the beef perspective, those are our major world competing exporters. I mean, Brazil, the big one, Australia second, Canada's down a little ways, but basically those are, three of the largest 5 world's exporters of beef. The red things here show that they've mandated some aspect of animal identification or tracing. Paul talked yesterday about Australia's system and about Canada's system and how further advanced they are, and we all know that, relative to the U.S. in terms of animal identification and ultimately traceability. So our competitors out there, New Zealand, we saw the quote earlier, they're gaining and have gained and are trying to build even further that international global trust. Trust, right? That's part of that dimension. Oh, it's an insurance agent. It's an insurance policy too, but it's about building trust, helping make sure that those industries are safe and that they can deliver with integrity and confidence to those consumers, and that the gatekeepers trust their product. Oh, now, by the way, look at the other side of this chart. The bottom side are the major importers and what they're doing. We've heard a lot of noise. Japan, Paul mentioned yesterday, Japan's new party, it sounds like traceability within the country is going to become an increasingly demanded aspect, probably written into stronger policy domestically. South Korea is already doing more of that as well. How far away are we before they say, okay, you meet our standard or you don't play in our market. You don't have access to our market. A non-tariff trade barrier that's pretty easy to instigate or institute and will not be challenged by World Trade, in my opinion, by World Trade Organization. it's like what we require of anybody else who meets our standards. You come into our market, you meet our standards. We go to yours, we're going to have to meet your standards. Point is, both the world's greatest exporters in terms of volume and the world's largest import markets are at the same time rapidly adopting tracing as just an everyday way of doing business. So we're behind a bit. We're behind a bit, I think, in terms of where both sides, where the competitors are as well as where the consumers are, at least from the beef perspective. Well, let me talk about a couple more numbers and then I'll quit throwing tables at you. As an economist, one thing I can do, and as you look at our benefit cost report, you'll see, is generate tables and tables and tables and tables of numbers. Every scenario you could possibly dream up, we've probably already dreamt up, and if it's not in a table there, we can run it for you. John Evans mentioned earlier that one of the values coming out of these kinds of efforts that California's group and us in our benefit cost analysis have done, we've built models that we can do a lot of scenarios with. So if you want to test something, probably we can evaluate it. We might charge for it, depending on how hard it is too, but we'll certainly consider it. Let's suppose we don't do anything. Suppose we just sit here and say, well, let's just let whatever happen, happen. We don't try to advance our animal traceability in the beef industry, and we just sit here, watch the rest of the world go by, because why do we care? We should do things our way. We're independent cowboys, right? Well, if by doing that we lose 10% of our market share in the export market for beef alone, well, how would we do that? Well, because maybe somebody out there, like a Japan or a South Korea, says meet our standard or don't come in. If we don't have enough of our industry meeting that standard, we won't get our product in there. It's conceivable. It could happen. Pretty soon, Kevin's $6 per head cost estimate's wiped out. In other words, we close 10% of our market. The cost per head, per animal sold in the U.S., per bovine animal sold, is going to be over $7. You pay for ID in a hurry with that kind of an event. You get up to larger losses, and of course the amounts get quite high in terms of dollar per head loss. Well, let me talk about another alternative. What if, and this is coming out of our model, what if we did adopt, and let's call it an animal traceability system. We were looking specifically here at an NAIS type adoption with a full traceability component. Kevin talked about the costs. If we had 90% of our industry adopt that technology based on his conservatively high costs, we think they're good representations, but he did say we're being conservative on those on the high end. At a 90% adoption rate, we'd need 35% of our export market expanded to pay for it. If no other value came out of that identification system, no other value, that alone would be enough to pay for it. That sounds a little high maybe, I don't know. What's 35%? Well, that's basically Japan in 2003. One market potentially that closes to us could pay for the entire system even if we had no animal health management benefits, and we know we would. Even if we had no, what John said, secondary enhanced management opportunities, which we know we would. You talk to the folks in Australia, and what they tell you, that they told us during our study when we interviewed them, is people are way past the issue of what's it cost me, and they're now spending most of their energy on where are the value opportunities in my own operation, because I've got the system. Now, how do I optimize its value? All right, so the point is, losing 20% market share for us in the U.S. can mean a single market closure. A South Korea, or a Japan, or a Mexico, or a Canada, or a Gulf. You really have those four being your major opportunities. What about the domestic market? That assumes our own consumers have no value associated with enhanced traceability and trust. Very small changes in our domestic market. In fact, less than a 1% increase in demand in the domestic market with no animal health mitigation value and no export market access value, 1% increase in demand domestically would pay for the entire system. So, it gives you perspective. Gives you perspective of what kinds of impacts, economic impacts, and what kinds of sort of, if you want to call it, break-even types of opportunities would be there if we were to adopt animal ID. So let me just close then, and we'll open it to general discussion. The gatekeepers of the world are demanding this. They expect, they need trust in our product. We'll increasingly be challenged as an industry across all our species if we don't continue to advance our capabilities in traceability. I just think it's a given. It's our new paradigm. It's where the world global standard is. If we do nothing, I sincerely think that will happen. I'm not telling anyone here what a policy proposition should be, because that's not my job. My job is simply to help you understand what we might face depending upon what pathways we take, and that there are incentives there for adopting these kinds of opportunities.